Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Arsenal Pass. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Michael Hamilton, two-time coin champion, who's joined us for a bit of an Oldhim deck tech. Michael, how's it going?
It's going great. Happy to be here. How are
Yeah,
you doing, Hayden?
I'm good, thank you. I'm on the mend after a bit of illness, post sort of pro tour traveling. You've just yourself gotten back, and now you're testing for US nationals. How's the testing going?
It's going great. We're testing every morning, getting a lot of reps in. I feel very good about my deck, so looking forward to it.
Good to hear. Good to hear, Michael. Before we dive into this Ultimate deck tech, which is basically, I guess, a bit of a move on from your Pro Tour deck list. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, in case for the three or four people that don't know who you are already.
Uh, well, I'm Michael Hamilton. I've been playing Flesh and Blood for a little over a year now. I started between Monarch and Tales of Aria. I just kind of combined them a little bit.
Maria.
Yeah. My best friend Roger introduced me, and we started playing together. We started playing with Monarch Blitz decks, and then we started moving to Sealed, and then eventually we went to the Calling Cincinnati, where I made top 8, and he had a pretty good performance as well. And after that, we were just hooked. A couple weeks later, we bought last minute flights to Orlando, and I fortunately happened to win that one. And then I've been mainstay of Flesh and Blood since.
Yep. We've got an ongoing joke on the kind of Arsenal Pass pod, which is like, being really consistent in this game's hard unless your name's Michael Hamilton. So, of course, why don't you tell us a little bit about how PT Lille went for you and why you chose to play Oldhim?
Yeah, so PT Lille went very well. I got 15th. I ended up losing my winning into Prism in the last round for top 8. I chose Oldhim because I think that with the way that we built it, we would have a very, very favored matchup into all three of the aggro decks, 5 Isserai, and Briar. And I expected them to be 50+% of the field between the three of them. And that's basically why I chose Oldhim. I didn't think that Prism would be as represented as she was, mostly because I thought we always kind of expected that she would struggle a little bit into the aggro heavy field if we thought 50% of the field would be these aggro decks. So I thought it would be dodge Prism, beat up the aggro decks, and it was we almost got there, and then just lost the Prism in the last round.
Yeah, so close. So that's two a top 32 and a top 16 for the first two Pro Tours, right? So I mean, you can't be unhappy with it, right?
Yeah. If I could lock in 15th going into it, I would, but it still hurts in the moment to lose to Prism in the last round.
Yeah. I feel that pain from PT1. Okay, well, we've got the Ultim deck tech. We're going to bring the list up in a minute, but I did just want to ask you a few questions about just kind of Ultim and why Ultim, right? So, of course, we're in the midst of national season right now. First of all, I want to ask you, Ultim looks like the deck to beat right now. Yeah, like we've seen it win the majority of week 1 nationals. Where do you think where it sits right now in terms of a deck to pick for this national season and heading towards Worlds?
Yeah, I think Oldhim is one of the best choices. I think his only truly horrible matchup is Living Legended Out. And most of the other decks that are good against him, you can build him to at least have a reasonable matchup into them. Whereas the Prism matchup was not something you could really build to beat. So I think Oldhim has basically every build's going to have not all good matchups, but you can have a reasonable matchup into whatever you expect the metagame to be from Oldhim right now.
Makes sense. And is this list we're about to look at, is this much different to what you played at the PT? Like, is there any big innovations in Oldhim, or is it a kind of just refining of solid lists?
Yeah, it's a few cards off from what I played at the Pro Tour. Mainly I wanted to make sure that it's a little bit better into these controlling decks and better into the mirror, which I expect to be pretty popular.
Yes. Yep. I mean, definitely after what we've seen in the first week. All right, Michael, why don't we dive in, take a look at this list, and start breaking it down with the audience. Okay, so Michael, right in front of us here, we've got the deck list, looking over things. I want to start by asking you a little bit about this equipment suite you've got here, because 11 of your 80 cards are dedicated to your equipment and weapons loadout. So maybe you could talk us through, first of all, why Sledge of Ambelheim, and then why some of these other additional pieces of equipment like Heart of Ice that we don't always traditionally see, plus the 2 shields.
Yeah, so every piece of equipment has a spot where it's quite good. And since equipment starts in play, it's like some of the most valuable slots you can get out of your sideboard. If switching an equipment makes a big difference in the matchup, that's a change that you're going to always see, and you'll see it turn after turn where it matters that it's better. So Sledge is specifically there for the Oldhim mirror. It also comes in against Icelander, but it's mainly there for the mirror, where you can the games go really long, and in a long game you can pitch a blue and use a tunic counter to swing the sledge. And every time you do that, you're one card in a tunic countering for 6, which is a very good rate. And then they also can get fatiguey. So if the game goes as the game's going long and you start running out of cards in deck, you want to be playing the weapon that attacks for 6 instead of 4 when it comes to fatigue.
Yep.
For the Heart of Ice and the Null-Rune Gloves, both are just there for Icelander and I guess Kano if Kano shows up. It's mostly there because you really want a V3. A lot of the time you're playing against Icelander, you don't want them to be able to just Waning Moon you on your turn without and leak a lot of damage. Otherwise it can be pretty hard to win the race. And it's also really nice to have Heart if they're against the decks with a lot of defense reactions. You can activate Heart, and then their 0-cost defense reactions suddenly require them to pitch a card. Their unmovable takes pitching 2 cards now once you've activated Heart of Ice. So if you expect a lot of defense reactions, Heart of Ice is the place to be.
How good is that Heart of Ice against forcing them to make an action at the start? Give you as much information as possible if they're trying to freezing point shenanigans or Ice Eternals, things like that. Does that give you the most information because you get to hold back your resources before you make any sort of choices?
Yeah, it does. It definitely is nice against those effects. One thing that I would caution against, though, is overactivating Heart. If you have a 4-cost attack and a blue and a red you want to pitch to use this 4-cost attack, then you don't need to activate Heart every turn. But the times that you do have extra resources floating around, it's really nice to have that option.
Yeah, okay, cool. And then talk to us a little bit about Rampart versus Stalagmite.
Yeah, so Stalagmite's the default shield. It's great against the Rune Blades because if they have 1 resource floating and no tunic counter, you can just stop their Rosetta swing or require them to pitch a whole extra card to do it. So Stalagmite, it's very easy to get quite a lot of value against the Rune Blades out of it. Rampart is mostly there for just 2 matchups. Against Dash, she usually goes on the pistol plan against you, where she's setting up these items and going for a long game where she'll activate the pistol and then reload it and then break the chain to put a steam counter on it so she can fire it again. And every time she does that, Rampart's going to get reset and you can block with it again. And it ends up saving quite a lot of damage once she gets the pistol combo going. And then the other spot is against Bravo. You don't really need Sledge against Bravo because if the game goes super long, you're going to win anyway because Bravo doesn't have as good of ability to pitch stack as Oldhim does. And he's also more vulnerable to fatigue because his weapon can attack for 6, but he doesn't have Earth React, he doesn't have Crown of Seeds, he doesn't have Rampart. Right. So he can't prevent as much damage without expending cards as you can, basically. Yeah. And then
all his defense cost cards, right?
Yeah. And additionally, Rampart can be really important for hitting breakpoints against Bravo for like his dominate effects when he spends almost a whole card to activate his hero power to give his attack dominate. If you can, between Crown and Rampart, you can cover up a decent amount of the damage, and that makes it just really tough for Bravo.
Yeah, it's really like you notice when you play against non-Rune Blade heroes, if you don't play the Rampart, sometimes the Crown can be a bit awkward, right? Like you're like, okay, I pitch 1 to activate this Crown, but if you don't actually have the resources to sink into the Rampart afterwards, it can often be like actually a bad trade for you, right? You could often just be better blocking for 3 or saving that card for offense or another arsenal.
Yeah, it's almost always just better to block for 3 than activate Crown if you don't have Rampart. And even when you have Rampart, it's still usually better to just block for 3 because Crown plus Rampart is just 2. So
yeah, definitely see some over activations of Crown from time to time. It's not always the default option. Let's jump into 69 cards that are playable in your deck. There, what are some of the cards that are not really main deck, or I guess are more sideboard options? Like if we let's start with the reds. What are the reds are really core, and then what are kind of utility pieces? I noticed something that I haven't seen from a lot of Oldhims is Erase Face plus Command and Conquer.
Yeah, so Command and Conquer stays in every matchup. Erase Face is mostly there for both Viscerai and Fi. The on-hit effect is pretty potent into both heroes. It stops Fi's Emberblade from having go again. It makes his Phoenix Flame attack for 0 and also expensive to return to his hand. And it stops Spreading Flames turns as well. And then against Viscerai, it makes all of his cards not generate the extra regen off his hero power. on top of also just turning off Modern Skies. So it's quite good in both of those spots. And like I said, when putting this list together, I really wanted to be favored into all three of the aggro decks. So that meant teching in the specific on hits that are good in each matchup.
Yeah, and this, I mean, the thing that I guess people would be alerted to pretty quickly is you're not playing, you're playing Stalagmite into these Rune Blades. You're not planning to fatigue them, right? You're planning to kill them.
Yeah, you're punching the Rune Blades. Occasionally, they will be blocking a lot because they have to block and they'll run out of cards that way. But that's not like your main game plan. It's just sometimes you have tempo for several turns in a row and they start running low on cards in deck. But for the most part, if they aren't blocking a ton, you're going to kill them. And if they are, that's when fatigue comes into play because you're playing your one attack that attacks for 8 or for 7 or for 6, and they're blocking with two or three cards, and you're coming out ahead in cards in deck. But for the most part, you're just killing them.
Now you're talking my language. Best form of defense is offense, Michael, as we well know. So pummels in every matchup. They're a part of your proactive plan into what this Oldhim looks like, right?
Yeah. So pummel specifically combines really well with Command and Conquer, where you can pitch a blue with a tunic counter and play your Command and Conquer, and you have that one floating resource, and you have that tunic counter, and basically you can pummel it, and you almost always pummel it, but sometimes you don't. I guess there's like occasionally a situation where you don't, like if they overblock or something, but that basically turns it into a 3 cards that you're using plus a tunic counter, and you get 10 damage, you get their arsenal, and you get a card in their hand. So it's 3 cards for 10 damage and 2 cards. It's quite a good rate.
Yeah.
And because of that, those 2 are core in the deck and stay in every matchup.
Okay. What about these yellows? Because there's some interesting cards that are over here as well. We look at Yellow Earthwall Surge is not a card I was expecting to see when you ship this deck list over for this, Michael. So tell us about the Earthwall Surge and the Yellow Autumn's Touch.
Yeah, so Yellow Autumn's Touch is, well, I guess the main reason we have these Yellow Earth cards is, for the most part, they're better than Blue Earth cards because the main use you want for these Earth cards is you pitch a Yellow Earth card and a Blue Ice card to activate Oldhim's Hero Power. You get both effects, and then you have 2 resources floating after that. And then you can use those 2 resources for activating Crown, activating Null Rune Boots, activating Rampart in the matchups that you have Rampart, or activating the other gloves, Ironhide Legs. So that's the main reason we have these Yellow Earth cards. And then they also revealed Oakenold. Oakenold's a very good card. That one also stays in every matchup.
Makes sense.
So Autumn's Touch is the best because it blocks for 3 when you don't want to Earth Ice react. And then Earthwall Surge was actually a card we discovered kind of late in the testing process leading up to the Pro Tour. We were trying some of the bad yellow attacks like Evergreen and Breakground, but those were just like you were never happy to play them. And when you drew them, it was just, if you didn't Earth Ice react with them, they were a block 2 that you probably just wanted to Arsenal and Crown away later. But you can't have too many cards that you just want to Crown away. It's really rough. And then Earthwall Surge, we found that it had a lot of powerful interactions similar to Pummel in the deck, where you could, off a tunic counter, you could use a blue to play as Command and Conquer for 10. And that was really strong. And then some of these decks that we're playing against also just, they leave us with a lot of cards in hand while they're trying to set up their big things, like Icelander, like Dash. They just don't pressure us that much. And it's really nice to be able to more efficiently use your hand when you're in spots like that. So Earthwall Surge was just like, it does enough things well enough to make the cut, basically.
Makes sense.
It's not an all-star, but it's a role player.
It seems really good. Like as you're just talking about now, I'm just more and more on board with playing that card in Oldhim. Maybe to finish off, because there's a lot of familiar resource cards in the blue spots here, but there's a lot of like ones and things like that. So maybe just talk us through. First of all, maybe the one-off Sink Below and your kind of one-off your defense reaction suite. You're playing 4, they're very interesting. Maybe tell us a bit about the defense reaction suite here. And then maybe just tell us a little bit about Expose the Elements and the one-off Tome Harvest.
Yeah, so for the defense reactions, you want some defense reactions in the Guardian Mirror. The more is generally better, but they aren't so important that you're going to lose without having a whole bunch of them. And just having enough to stop the Oakenolds and the Pummels is really what you're looking for. And Sink Below specifically lines up really well against Pummel because you can block for the exact amount. They pummel, you play a Sink Below, and then that's a very good exchange for you when that comes up. The bigger defense reactions, the 2 red staunches and the 1 blue staunch, are much better against Oakenold. They're better against Crippling Crush, and just like overall, they're better. But I think you get a little bit of value from having split D-reacts. And there's also some value. And once you've played the first Sink Below and the Guardian Mirror, your opponent's likely to think you're on 3. So it might make them a little more hesitant about using a pummel when you've had a card sitting in your arsenal for a while or something.
Yeah. Okay. And then some of these blue one-offs like the Expose, the Toma Harvests.
Yeah. So Exposed wasn't in my Pro Tour list. It's one of the additions. I think it is one of the most important cards in the Oldhim Mirror against the strategy that I'm using, where you want to use your Tunic counter to swing your Sledge every third turn, basically off a single blue pitch. Exposing Tunic early in the game gets you a ton of value, basically, because that Tunic is going to be worth a card every time they use it to swing Sledge, which in games that go on for 20, 25 turns, that's probably like 5 cards you're going to get out of it. So that's why Expose is there. I think it's probably the most important card in the mirror, and it's okay in a couple other spots, but it's mostly there for the mirror. And I think Oldhim's on the rise, so that's why it slid in. And then the Tome of Harvest kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Earthlore Surge, where you want another card that's makes your 4 or 5 card hands that don't do anything into something pretty good. And the main time this comes up is you cast your Oakenold, you fuse the Tome of Harvest in an ice card, you arsenal the ice card, and then your opponent doesn't do anything because they just got Oakenold and they had to put 2 cards on the bottom. So you suddenly have 4 cards in hand, maybe 3 if they attacked you for a little bit and you blocked one of them. And then if you draw a hand of all blues at that point, it's really not great to not be able to do something super proactive. And when you draw those all blues there, you can pitch a blue, play the Tome of Harvest, and get 3 more draws to try to find a good attack.
Yeah.
It's also not great, but that combined with another Earth card for Oakenold and giving you access to more Earth React in the Guardian Mirrors is basically why it's there.
Makes sense. And of course, like the second, the third are just a lot poorer than the first, right? So the one of makes sense in that situation.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, any final sort of notes on this list, Michael, before we kind of wrap it up? Anything that you particularly want to highlight that's different or you think is a really interesting kind of dynamic with this list?
I think the other thing that is pretty important to bring up is the Endless Winners that got brought in. They are so good against decks that are trying to block you out. You play this Endless Winner, you ice fuse it, and now if they try to block with 2 cards or 3 cards and set something up, they're going to have a bunch of Frostbites. They can't set anything up. So Endless Winner against decks that want to block you, it's just the best attack action for those kind of matchups. And it wasn't in my Pro Tour list, and it quickly found its way in afterwards when these defensive decks that are blocking out were on the rise.
Yeah, makes sense. I found it particularly good against Icelander, personally.
Yeah, it's very good there.
Cool. Well, Michael, I want to say a big thank you. And if anyone's looking for a more in-depth guide, Michael has very kindly written up for Arsenal Pass patrons a full deck guide with sideboarding notes for majority of the big matchups that you're likely to see this coming season. That's all over there with a full write-up. I think Michael's done a good 5 or 6 pages. So Michael, big thank you. There's goes really in depth about playing certain matchups and card choices. So you can check that out on the AP Patreon. And Michael, best of luck for Nationals next weekend. I'll be glued to the coverage, looking to see you on that feature match. And thanks again for coming in and doing this deck tech on Oldhim.
Yeah, you're welcome.